time for Book of Experts TV.
Topics you love.
Experts you trust.
Friction-free referrals.
Tried,
tested,
Trusted.
This is Book of Experts, brought to you by salesman.me.
All right, welcome back to bookofexperts.tv. And today we're doing Masterclass Monday, and we're talking about how to comment, how to do this social media thing for more impact, more engagement, and a little less weird. You know what I'm talking about? Where originally we're going to call this how not to be weird on social media. But what we're really saying is, how do you engage with people? And specifically, we're going to talk about some strategies and tactics, tools, tips that you can use around the idea of commenting with other folks, because it's meant to be social, right? Social media is not just a broadcast mechanism. You create content, you put it out there, and it's a one-way street. No, it's meant to be conversational. It's meant to engage with others. And when you do it right, you will see 5, 10 times, maybe 50 times more reach with your content and with your commenting when you use the right strategies. That's what we're talking about today. Again, it's a Masterclass Monday. I'm going to bring on our guest. I'm excited to have him. He's actually a returning guest. He's been on with us on the expert panels before. I'm bringing in John Hitler. That's John Hitler with, yes, that name, but with 2 T's. I learned that from you, John, when we first met. You clarified that right up front. You know, talk about a name, getting stuck with a name that you carry with you for your whole life.
Well, like you, Tobin, I picked bad parents. So it's just maybe for different reasons. That's all.
I think people always take a double take when they see it, because it's just not a name that you see very often. Right. But I think what I love about you, John, you have a great sense of humor. You and folks, you will see this as we engaged with you tonight, this afternoon and tonight. A great sense of humor and a way to look at yourself in a self-effacing, let's have fun with this, but let's be smart about it too. And I think you make an impression on people, whether it's your name or the way you talk with them, the information that you share. That's the most important thing. How do they feel when you finish up?
No, that's great. Thanks, Tobin. Yeah, well, it should be fun today.
So what I want to talk about today, this topic, I'll be honest with you, we're getting a lot of buzz. But it's also a selfish topic. One of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you, John, is we've got a whole bunch of users. You're familiar with our Bat Signal. We call it the Bat Signal Social Pod. Part of what we're doing tonight is creating a bunch of ideas, tips, strategies that they can use and apply because we're doing this on the inside of Book of Experts. We have a cohort of people that we want to take care of. We want to give them the best information, but that's not the only thing we're doing in the masterclass today. We're also talking about this bigger picture of social media, what's happening in that space. We'll talk a little bit about the social pods, but mostly about the commenting and how to leverage this as a strategy. Can you give us a little bit of your background and how you come, because I really haven't talked yet. I probably should have, but I'm going to let you describe it, about Evoking Genius, 9-time entrepreneur, working with CEOs at a very high level, high growth focused companies, startups. Can you give us a little bit of that background and then bring us back around to the social media side of it and what you actually do hands-on?
Oh, that's great. It's funny, the two go to hand in hand, because every company I started, rather than going out with an idea and trying to raise capital and get a CEO and all that other stuff, I suffer indelibly from what I call the wisdom of ignorance. It would never dawn on me that this wasn't a great idea. And the easiest way to prove that was to go out and find 3 people that said, that is a great idea. And then say, well, would you like to be the first one? Yeah, good. I just need a down payment, or I need a deposit. And if 3 people would give me a deposit, then I would go into business and say, if it took 3 out of 1,000, I'd say this is a terrible idea. But if it took 3 out of 5, I'd say, good, I've got 3 deposits. I don't even have the product yet. I only have the idea for the product. Well, social media works the same way. You have an idea, you immediately get feedback and or validation, or you get crickets. And we were kidding prior to the show, when you or I have done a thud of a post, how do you tell somebody their baby is ugly? Well, on social media, what it means is nobody likes, nobody comments, and that's the equivalent of an ugly baby, is that just nobody pays attention. Because what do we do with an ugly baby? We cringe and turn away. and the social media equivalent of that is by just scrolling over it, just going, oh God, that's an awful post, or it looks dumb, or there's nothing there, or it's self-promote, all the things that all the mistakes people make. And that's the equivalent of an ugly baby. Well, that's also what I do in business, is I work with companies that are not ugly babies, but are trying to figure out, how do we get to our next success? How do we scale? How do we double? We're doing as best we can, and it's still not good enough. How do we get better? It's a fun game. And social media is the same too. If social media is working well, it's a really fun game.
I think so. I want to extract a couple things that John said. So first of all, I'm going to go on the last one. It is a game that we're playing here, folks, and you might as well have fun with it. You might as well, if you're going to play the game, enjoy it, figure out what's fun to you, and don't do the parts that aren't so much fun. Because honestly, life is short. You don't have time to try to be everywhere on every social media platform, conversing with everyone and trying to make all these things happen. Much better if you can just create a real dialogue, a real engagement with the right people. Of course, that's part of the focus. The other thing that you talked about, and I'm going to go back to the ugly baby reference. That is a hard thing. We've all, in fact, I'd love to hear from you guys, from our audience. If you're catching the live stream here on social media, you can do it through comments and likes and all that stuff. But I'd love to hear if you can identify with that feeling of having a dud out there. By the way, this is totally like, I have had these posts. I'm sure you guys probably have as well. You put something out, you've worked on it, you think it makes sense.
You think it's great.
You just get crickets. People do not engage with you the way that you expect. And if you let it, it can feel like a kick in the stomach or a kick in the pants, either way, but it's just data. That's how we want to think about this. Because the second, probably more important thing that I heard John say was, this is about the testing environment, and social media is a big petri dish and an opportunity for us to run different experiments. The successful ones we can take with us. We can build that into, again, these high growth companies, in your case, John, or maybe just your first or your second client, if that's where you're at in the process. This can be the difference. But if you're just trying to throw spaghetti at the wall, you can do that on social media. But if you try to do that in your sales conversations and with your clients, why not vet the good stuff? Why not get the good stuff out of social media? See what really resonates and what words people are using. So I like this as a frame, John. So for thinking about content, how do you think specifically about the content that you're creating versus the commenting? Because I want to start there, because I see a lot of kind of like a lot of people in the world will put a lot of time into creating their product and just a very little bit amount of time into their sales and marketing. We actually, in many cases, you can flip that a ratio and do, product, a little bit of product, a lot of sales and marketing. That's going to win. And same thing in this commenting. There's as much opportunity in the comments as there is in creating content. So can we dig a little deeper into that?
No, it's great. When I was thinking about the topic in advance, one of the things I realized, I think and play in the vernacular of games. I always have. As a kid, it was always, how do you game the? It wasn't how do you game the system, but how do you play to win? How do you? And people talk that way. They use those cliches, but they don't understand that they're playing a game that won't produce the win they want, and they don't realize they're doing it. And so, for instance, and we've seen it. I've done it too. When I get an ugly baby post, and almost no like, my mom and my sister and my wife sometimes, if she didn't, if we're on good speaking terms, those are my 3 comments or likes. And you think, what did I do wrong in this one? And then I go back and look at it and oh God, it was all about me. It was self-promotional. Oh, that's an ugly baby. And we all kind of know that. And then we think what we posted wasn't self-promotional. And if you go back and look at it, you say, you know what, that wasn't about the audience at all. It was only about me. So why would anybody need to comment other than to just, sometimes you get likes on those. For me, one of the ways I know that I posted an ugly baby is if I get almost no comments and lots of likes. The lots of likes are just, it's like your family saying, oh yeah, we still like you. So they click because you didn't give the audience room to play the game. You squeeze them out by saying, here's a post all about me. Aren't I great? And don't we agree it's all about me? And there's nothing they can say except nice post. And nice post in our game is a like, because there's nothing to comment on. They didn't ask me to comment. There's not a question. There's no room to comment. All I can do is agree with their post. And as a friend or as a colleague, I will click like. That's an ugly baby. And I do it. I still do it. After I go back and I kick myself and say, gosh darn it, that was supposed to engage the audience by this way or this method. And I thought I had done that and I'd fallen way short. So yeah, so it's always the crowd is always right. If you're not getting any comments, it's not the crowd. It's never the crowd. You got an ugly baby.
So by the way, I love this. This is now in our comments. I just put it in our group as well, that when you're getting a lot of likes and no comments, that is you find your ugly baby post.
Yeah, that's you. That's not them.
To take it deeper, we're being too much about us, too self-promotional, too weird, honestly, because that's one of the things I wanted to bring to the table is there's stuff that we do on social media that we would never, in a million years, never get away with in real life. Right. Like you would not go to the cocktail party and just start droning on and on about you and what you do and you're self-promotional. You know, I've got this, and because people would
you've been to parties like that and you say, oh my God,
don't be that guy.
What a dead bore. Yeah. Because they never even ask you your name. They just, they're a walking billboard. You go, man, get me away from this house. How long do I have to stay to be polite until I can exit? And that's the same with a post. You say, how long do I have to read this post before I realize I don't have to read this post anymore because it doesn't seem to include me. You get 3/4 of the way down and say, still doesn't include me, all the way down. And then at the end, it'll say, DM me if you want to refer somebody or have more questions. You go, no, I've had more than enough. Like and get out of there. And that's like is polite. That's a generous like. Because they should just, Facebook looked at it for a while. They were going to have a dislike so that people could get, and they decided not to. But I think it would be helpful for some people just to get some, I think they'd probably lose subscribers, but they get some real world feedback and just say this, not that it's offensive. You say it's irrelevant or it has nothing to do with me or have a point. I get that feedback all the time, when I post an ugly baby. And I like to think that I don't. And it's always accurate that when I get horrible engagement, I go back and look at it and say, you know what, I meant it this way and it came out this way. Gosh darn it.
I think we've all done this. We've all made this mistake. Sure. And this is part of the game that we're playing. Right. By the way, we're going to return to this concept of the game and who's making the rules, whose actual game is it? Well, there's a lot to explore on that. I want to talk about this real life example. So we have our book coming out next month. And one of the examples, this came up in our training probably a year or so ago. I started calling it the Paco principle because I had this young man who was on our ambassador team. We were training him, and he was a really smart guy. He's actually an engineering student in a master's degree program, learning these conversational outreach skills. And one day it just clicked for him. He was like, "Oh my God!" I shared something with him, and I'm going to tell this, John. I'll share it with you and with our wider audience here. But I shared this one thing and you could just see it in his eyes. It was like the switch was flipped and he said, this all just snapped into place what we're doing here. Because honestly, it can feel a little bit weird to be in this social space and understand why did they react to this thing and why not this way and what's actually going here. And what I shared with Paco, the Paco principle was, if you would not do this thing in real life, like if you can project yourself into a coffee shop and you're sitting and you're in Starbucks and you're in one of those big comfy chairs, padded comfy chairs, and the person next to you is like, you just see that they're there and there's a chance to make a little conversation, not heads down working, but it's going to be a social situation. If you wouldn't launch into talking about your webinar and masterclass that's coming up and this and that, you probably shouldn't do the same thing online. Like that's your measuring stick. If you won't do it in real life, don't do it online. Right. And for him, it made all the difference in the world. Yeah. So I want to also go a little bit deeper on this idea of commenting versus the content. How much time for you, John, are you setting aside for, how do you think about your role and responsibility between what you're putting together as your content that's going to make a difference, get eyeballs, boost your visibility and engage with people, versus what you're thinking about on the actual commenting, the engaging in the creation of this dialogue?
So when I go to, when I know, or when I think I want to post, and I don't post a ton, because I post, it's the game I play is I should post once or maybe twice a week, substantially, not just, I comment on stuff all the time. But I don't normally, you see people that post 4 and 5 times a day, and that's obvious their strategy is to throw out crap ton, a technical word, of course, crap tons of content. And that's their theory. The more content I post, the more people will recognize my brand and whatnot. I have just the opposite view. The quality, give them enough so that when they see something that they actually go, oh yeah. Like I have only 3 podcasters that I listen to. I'm open to more, but there are 3 that challenge me every time and engage me. And it doesn't matter who their guest is, because they only have really good guests and they allow the guest to talk. Oh, that's helpful, because some podcasters, it's about the podcaster, not the guest. Those are usually not very interesting. Commenting, I find this is the same way. When I do less and think about it, Mondays are where I have a little, on one of my whiteboards, I just write ideas that hit me during the week. Weird things, odd stories. Sometimes it's topical or relevant, but I'm specifically looking for different themes. I'm looking for provocative, not controversial, but provocative. I want to provoke them to take a stand. I was on a forum about it would have been about 4 weeks ago, because it was before the inauguration, and it was put on by I won't say the name, but it was one of the Congress people who was trying to influence the Biden administration's platform as they came into the office. So the forum, and the representative was not on there, but their staff was running it, was on the idea of giving all student loan debt. Isn't that a great idea? Well, it's kind of like saying, aren't lower taxes for everyone a good idea? Well, no one's going to oppose that. They say, I'd like lower taxes. Well, anybody that has student debt is not going to be opposed to that either. Well, so the forum I was on, I was invited as an economist, and I said, have you looked at the Office of Management and Budget numbers for the fiscal year? Because one of the questions I asked was, who will pay for this gigantic expenditure? And they said, well, we're going to tax the 1%. And I said, look at the office. If I can access the Office of Management and Budget statistics, you're an elected official or you're a staffer for one, so can you. You can tax 100% of the income of the top 1%, and it doesn't even cover half of the shortfall for this year alone, let alone no new programs. They don't piece sense. That was one of the questions I asked, and I didn't give an answer. I just said, have you checked this thing, and how are you going to pay for it? The second was, I said, what about people that didn't go to college? Let's say you're in the trades and you have a bunch of specialized tools and you need a $60,000 pickup truck that can haul 10,000 pounds. The payments on that truck are $800 a month. And the question I asked specific, and I was very careful with the wording, is it discriminatory was the word I used. Is it discriminatory to only offer a benefit for college students as opposed to non-college students? Because it is. No, I didn't answer the question, but I asked 4 questions like that, all very provocative, not mean-spirited. But they didn't want that. What they wanted was people to say, yay, I support you, and I'll write the White House too, so that we can forgive everybody's college student loans. And it's a dumb post, because it's only got one answer, and if you dissent, it's kind of crazy. But I got tons of feedback, even from people who initially said, oh, I hadn't thought about that. You're right. I don't really want that. I asked 4 different questions. They were provocative. So one of the things I look for in post is, do they provoke or force people to think? I don't care what the topic's about. Do they force people to think? I can argue either side of the coin. I don't have a preference with that. But that's a more fun post. It's a more engaging post, regardless of whether you don't like the direction it's going or whether you do. Because if you don't, then you dissent. And if you do, you say, I agree with that, and here's why. And most people don't do that. They go for polite. Polite's horrible because you don't need to comment. There's no reason for me to comment on a polite post. It's another like.
And a polite post is also the thing that's going to put you in the middle of the crowd. Like if you're looking for that opportunity to meet new people, interesting new people who may be the right fit for whatever you have going, you have to figure out how do you connect with them in a way that's going to stand out and be differentiated.
Right. Not
only in the work you do, but for them to even notice you in the first place, for them to show even the first iota of interest. Right. So if you're staying in there, so a couple of things I want to add here. So one, we're primarily going to be talking about LinkedIn tonight.
Great.
So you had shared a little bit of your posting schedule, how often you post. I do want to clarify. This will, for folks out there, if you're talking about Facebook, you're talking about Instagram, TikTok, how often you engage on Clubhouse, it's going to vary depending on which social network you're on. Primarily, John and I are we're going to confine our conversation tonight to LinkedIn. I will say that my position on this is that for social media, it's all plumbing, right? It's plumbing to have a conversation, a real conversation and dialogue with people. But there are different rules, and the platforms themselves have created the different rules. In a little bit, we'll talk about algorithms, we'll talk about social pods, what that may or may not mean for you. But it's all part of the game that we're playing. And I agree with John that posting too much, if you're trying to post 5 times a day on LinkedIn, it's actually working against you.
It's an annoyance.
Yeah, for more than one person.
What are they posting now? Yeah.
There are some, and this may be a good, maybe a question for our Q&A tables after the event, after the live stream portion. But I know there's been some discussion in our group about how do you sort of set or reset the algorithm. There's some advantages when you do a 30-day period, a 90-day period, and you're posting, 5 times a week. You that heightened activity once a day for a period of time kind of sets. It's almost like they're getting to know you and they know what to expect from you, and they
like
kind
a baseline.
Created the baseline. Thank you. That's a much better term. I also want to bring up a question from Andrew. He asked, and before I do this, just so you guys know, we are going to do Q&A tables. So if you're watching on social media, if you're watching on LinkedIn or Periscope, you saw us on Twitter or Facebook or wherever, YouTube, we're on all those places. We're live streaming right now, but we also have our core community is in AirMeet. That's the virtual event space. And the reason we've gone there is they're catching this live stream just like you are. But when we wrap up the live stream component, we're actually going to go to Q&A tables. This will be your opportunity to chat with John. Maybe you have some questions that you want to ask him. We actually have some questions we want to ask you, some thought-provoking questions as well to seed these discussions that we'll have afterwards. We'll do that at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So at the top of the hour, we'll be wrapping up this portion. We'll go to the Q&A tables for a little bit, at least while we have John. I know he's got a important meeting that he has to get to, but for 15 or 20 minutes, we'll have a chance to answer your questions and really connect with other experts in the audience as well. It's part of the networking that we do.
And Tobin, just so I'm clear, when we ask the questions of the tables, what do we call it? The retaliation round, or is that?
Yes. Well, we definitely want you. Better come with an answer. That's what I'm going to say. Come with your answer. We're gonna.
Not always nice.
So Andrew asked, and this question is specifically going to go back. He's thinking about the content and how do I be intelligent about my process. I'm going to put the question up, John. I bet your answer will be slightly different from mine, so we'll do 2 rounds of this one. So Andrew has said, how often do you research topics to see what people want to learn about?
It's a great question, Andrew. First of all, I never research, like do research, like go on. What I notice is what everybody's writing about. So Tobin and I, in the green room, if you will, a couple minutes before we connected up, one of the things I noticed that's just an absolute epidemic on LinkedIn, and it may be on other places as well, is this idea that all problems are solved with empathetic leadership. It's the new trendy term. Tons of articles, everybody on the Forbes platform is writing about it. And so what I'll do is, instead of saying, oh, I should go research that and see if it's true, I just take the opposite position. And oftentimes it comes in the form of a question. I say, I'll ask something like, if empathetic leadership could double your sales, wouldn't everybody wouldn't there be a rush for empathetic leadership? The truth is, who doesn't want to be more empathetic? But if you're not naturally inclined to be empathetic, you think Jeff Bezos is empathetic? I doubt it. If you look at their corporate stated values, none of them have to do anything with empathy, and they're the fastest scaling company. You think Tesla is empathetic? No. Elon Musk wrote a memo in the middle of COVID and said, "Get your butt back into the factory because we're going to go under unless we deliver cars, and we can't make cars if you're working from home." There was no empathy at all. He couldn't have cared less. It's not the so that's one of the things I do a lot. I'll look at what's popular and say, just ask myself, is that true? And the idea that empathetic leadership cures everything in every company, and the idea that every CEO or senior leader is going to say, "Oh, sign me up for a double dose of empathetic leadership," is insane. So I just take an opposite approach, and I'm not mean-spirited about it, but it's as if we're all supposed to just salute and say, "Oh, you're right. I need to go get an MBA specializing in empathetic leadership," because this year it'll be something different. Last year it made perfect sense because as a country and a globe, we had a really tough year. Empathy made sense. But what happens this year when you're not going to get tons of stimulus this year. You might get a second round. You're not going to get a third round. You better succeed or not. Empathy ain't going to help you succeed. So it's a perfect example of that kind of stuff, but it's all over social media. You see people, they all jump on a theme, and it can't be all one way. It just can't. So you just take an opposite. And this is what I mean when I say provocative. Just ask a provocative question. It makes people think. You don't have to give the answer. That's my version of research. I like to do that. And I do it sometimes politely, sometimes pointedly. I'll dissent.
But always playfully.
Almost always playfully. And when I do poke fun at people, I poke fun usually at myself.
Yeah.
I don't say this senator who didn't do their research is an idiot, even though it might sound like it sort of. I'll allow other people to come to that conclusion that shouldn't a democratically elected representative know their figures before they just say, let's do a gazillion-dollar tax increase over 30 years to pay off only 5 years worth of students graduating student debt. That makes no sense at all to me. So I just asked the questions that they couldn't answer. And but they invited me to the forum. They said, "We know you understand economics." Well, I just asked simple economic, like, how do we pay for it? That's not you don't need a PhD in economics to ask that question. And they just didn't care.
So Andrew said he's loving these real life examples of talking about Elon and Jeff Bezos. The thing I want to add, Andrew, to your question is, I also tend not to do this is a little bit contrarian. You're hearing this from John and from myself, but it's really contrarian in the space, which is a lot of folks when they talk content marketing they'll say go out to Google Trends, for example. Right. And see what people are talking about and try to find those hot topics, those keywords, and pull that in because there's already the data showing that there's interest there. So meet people where they're at. I actually don't like that approach because I'm much more interested in having the conversations with three groups of people. So the content that I'm going to create almost always, and I'll tell you when I do this right, and then the last example, I'll show you when I do it wrong. The three people that three groups of people I'm most interested in hearing from are, one, my clients that I'm already working with. Like, what questions are they asking? Quite often I'll actually answer their question privately because that's our engagement. They're in a private mastermind group or as whatever the structure is, but they've got my time and my attention. I'm going to give that best answer that I have available to them. But I'll also answer the question in a public way, not with their specific information. Obviously, I don't share that. But the fact that they're asking that question means that other people like them probably have some of those same questions too. And that's really interesting to me because I want more. If by the time they come through to be a client, like I vetted them too, as much as they vetted me, I want more people like them. Right. So that's really important to me. I do the same thing actually with the people I'm talking to as prospects. The just like John gave an example, if people are asking really thoughtful questions and saying, Does this actually make sense here? Tell me more about this. Those are usually really good questions, and they're on the through line of having a sales conversation. So I think that's super valuable. The last group of people is actually the ones who you did have that sales conversation with, and they said no. I'm really interested in those questions and how they're framing things, because while I really just want to build a relationship with those, whether they enroll or not, I want good relationships with the people I converse and dialogue with regularly. I also know if I can be smarter in the future and I can carry some of that information forward into the future, I can pre-pave better sales conversations by thinking about my content that way.
Yeah.
What we're going to do now, we're going to make a little shift. John, I'm going to give you a 2-minute break here in the action. When we come back, we're actually going to talk about social pods, both as a strategy, your experience, John, my experience, what we've learned about this, how you can, if you are interested in it, potentially leverage this tool and strategy for yourself, and some of the intricacies of what we've learned over the past year or two, some things that will really make this strategy work better for you. So we'll do that in just a moment. We'll also go back on this idea of how to really comment in a way that will expand your reach, more importantly, your impact. That's coming up in the next section. But first, let's talk about speed networking. That's what's coming up at the top of the hour. We're going to do Q&A tables with John. That's your chance to answer some of his provocative questions and think about, what are you actually doing with your content? Are you creating ugly babies, or are you actually taking things to a different level? And how do you know, right? We'll actually discuss. John shared his thoughts, but we want to converse about this a little bit. And then right afterwards, we will do the speed networking, and it's going to look a little bit like this. So why is this speed networking thing important to us? A couple reasons. One, you right now, whether you realize it or not, we're in a virtual space, you're actually surrounded by some of the best experts that you've never heard of. And so we want to give you that opportunity to meet some of these folks, bring you together. And in the speed networking, it's a very short amount of time. Your only goal is really to get a sense of this person. And does it make sense? You guys kind of hit it off, right? Does it make sense to have another conversation? You're not going to sell anything in a 4-minute session. Trust me. You got a couple minutes to share a little bit about what you do, hear what they do, and just say, you know what, this is pretty interesting. Could we take this into a conversation tomorrow? Could we jump on Zoom? Let's connect on LinkedIn, that kind of thing. So that's coming up. Again, we'll get into that top of the hour. We'll do Q&A tables with John. Then we'll move into the speed networking. That's coming up next. John, social pods. What does that mean to you? Can you give us the high-level overview and maybe a little bit about your direct experience with them?
Sure. So the bat signal, which you run, is a perfect example. It's essentially an agreement and a collaboration amongst a group of people to engage further by design. That's how I describe it. I'm in 2 of them. One is bat signal, which works well. And I'm also in one that's very different, which it's not live, it's automated. So it's all run by AI. And you just have to agree to participate. And what the AI does, it assigns comments from you to the person who posted that you didn't write. Scary. I'll tell you what, I struggled with that for a while because the posts were generic and they would say stuff like, great content, ! Not very helpful. The problem was when you think of commenting, it works like improv. The game you play is improv. You can never give a dead stop to your improv partner. When you finish something and then hand it to Tobin, he's got nothing. He can't build off that. So posting online is very much the same. It's like improv. You always leave with an open, which is a question, gentle dissent, curious curious about what you see. There's all that, because then it allows, let's say Tobin posted, if I say, I'm not so sure this will work for left-handers, what's your experience with this? If he's the expert, it's actually what I call a generous post. I'm actually setting up the expert to say, funny you should mention lefties versus righties. It actually works almost the same, but for people who are ambidextrous, it works best. I would have never known that, but I was curious enough to ask a question, and it presents him as the expert. And then if he wants to, he can throw it back and say, why, are you a lefty, a righty, or an ambidextrous? And now what are we doing? We're bantering, just like improv. You're going back and forth. And then other people jump in and say, that's funny. So I'm curious. I saw lefty, righty, ambidextrous. I'm right-handed. How big is the gap? Now someone else can jump in and say, am I in last place as a right-hander versus a lefty or an Now you've got a conversation going that draws other people in. It's what I call a generous post. And anything that's a dead stop, like nice post, double exclamation point, there's no place to go with that. It's a dead stop. And so I can't restart it without it being clunky. So the LEMpods that I've, because I do Bat Signal and the automated one together, what I finally figured out how to do about a month ago was customize the responses that came out of the AI one. I could just write my own. Oh, that was spectacular, because then I could ask the questions of myself that I wanted to answer. And I could design 10 or 12 relevant and improv based or generous posts and give them back to myself. They would assign one to whoever the AI assigned it to, because there's like 50 people in this, and they have 20 or so active every time. They would assign a great penetrating question that would cue me up to Tobin. Tobin doesn't even know it's there. It gives him the feed on his LinkedIn, and it says, oh, you commented on John's post. Then you go look and say, I did? Now you're in the LEMpod, so you know. Now that I've customized that works really well. And in conjunction with the Bat post, it's really good, because it's just efficient. You're just getting all of everybody's piling on at one time, so you get good momentum. And what I'm noticing is my views and interactions and comments and likes and all that stuff are way up, combining the two. So, but again, it's just a different form of game.
So let's talk for a second about why this works. The social pod concept, to my knowledge, I believe that this started on Instagram originally, which was this idea of gathering a group of people together who make a covenant with each other that
right.
You share your stuff, I'm going to share mine. We're going to help boost each other. Right. And it's going to kind of be like a big snowball that starts rolling downhill. If
right.
we can give that snowball a shove at the top of the hill by giving it this activity in the first golden hour after it gets posted, the social media platforms, today we're specifically talking about LinkedIn, but this is true on any of them, they will see this as, oh, people are showing interest here. Maybe this is good content. Let's show it to a few more. It starts to accumulate some momentum. And we've been doing the Bat Signal we're in our third year now. We are not automated. John was referencing LEMpod, which is the automation platform that works a little bit differently than we do. But we've been 3 years doing it hands-on, organic social pod activity. And we're consistently seeing between 5 to 10 times more reach when you do this concentrated activity in the first hour. And I know this because we've had myself and a number of members who have literally, you go down through your news feed on LinkedIn, you can see how many views, and you take a non-Bat Signal post and compare it, or several of them, and compare it against several. And consistently, it's always 5x, sometimes as high as 10x. And we've had a few members that have trended for their hashtag. One member who went viral and ended up getting 250,000 views in, I think, a week's time, something like that. Yep. That doesn't happen every time, I'll be honest with you. But it was that little boost at the beginning that kind of like, that's how viral things, every viral hit that you're familiar with, 99% of the time, there was engineered virality before that post actually happened. You saw the big splash, but what you didn't see was all the mechanisms that were done to get it there in the first place. And quite often social pods are part of that. Right. I want to push back for a second, John, because I'm going to play the role. I'm going to assume the role of one of my friends, not one specific friend, a bunch of them actually, that have argued with me about this. And I want to play that role. I know you're always willing to have a good dialogue here. But when I come to you and I say, why would I participate in a social pod? Because it feels artificial and inauthentic. You're asking me to comment and engage with someone's post that in a million years, I would never have done that. Otherwise, they just happen to be in the same group with me.
Right.
How do you think about that question?
It's a great question because unless you're all about peace, love, and understanding, and they're all about human sacrifice, and that just doesn't seem to fit. But even that, you could say, I want to bring up the opposite point of view. You can be the dissenter. The only part where it doesn't work is when the post or the commenter is ungenerous. And when I say ungenerous, the only thing I mean is it doesn't leave any room for the other person. So if you give an ungenerous post, it's, hey, look at me. I'm really smart. Isn't this great? DM me if you want more information. It was all in the post. There's nothing for me to DM you on because I don't want, the last thing I want is more information, like, and gone. Well, in a social pod, the agreement implied or explicit is that we post for what you have B, A, and T, building authority and trust. The game that's being played is engagement, not self-promotion. Self-promotion is probably the worst form of post you can have in a social pod because there's not much for anybody to do unless they are specifically in the market for your, and I think this might be what your friends are talking about is, why would I engage with somebody who's doing something that I would never buy? Or, well, it doesn't have to be, it can be on anything. It can be social trends. It can be industry trends that transcend any industry. Great. It's not difficult to do. And then it looks much more authentic. And that I hold as the responsibility of the person posting. They have to start the improv well. And if they don't, then it really does look clunky. It's because the comments are clunky because people have to try to manufacture something nice to say that doesn't really mean anything because there's really nothing to comment on. So it's
you and I have had that experience even
yes.
in the Bat Signals social pod where people have they've made the job that much harder.
Yeah.
One of the things that we in part of this is we're doing some constructive coaching with our group as well. So how do we all work together to get the best results out of this? And one idea that you can think about is if you are posting several times a week, maybe the social pod activity is not where you bring your offer post, where you do the, hey, engage with me. Because listen, I get it. You're engaged in social media because you're trying to generate some exposure and some amount of business. That's what we all need to do for what we're doing. Right. But what if you think about it a little bit differently in the sense of if you engage in a great conversation and now you're in the newsfeed of other people who are engaging with you, which by the way is one of the best ways of social discovery. Every single day, I'm meeting new people on LinkedIn that I've never heard of before, but I see someone really smart that I respect and admire commenting on their post. I go and read, and now my world is a little bit bigger and a little bit better, honestly, because they're sharing ideas. So you're getting exposure to other people's news feeds, whereas if all you do is converse with your own news feed, you're in a bubble, right? So I love that aspect of being able to expand on it. Use the pod to do the expansion. And then every once in a while, when you need to make that call, that specific call to action post that's related, maybe you do have an event. We do this a lot, an event coming up that people need to know about. Do that on days when, expand, bring them back to your news feed, share with them what you need them to know about the event that's coming up that you think they don't want to miss out on. Expand.
But that's not a good social pod one.
Right.
Just generally speaking. Yeah.
Really hard to converse with those. The other strategy, and I'm curious, I don't think I've shared this with you, John, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on it. The other thing that I often find myself doing when the post itself is a challenge for me to engage with, I'm looking for interfaces. Where can I plug into this? What have they said that I can be conversational here? And sometimes it's easier than others. If you don't find it in the post itself, very often you will find it in the comments. And this is for you Bat Signal users out there. This is why I love you guys. This is what I love best about you, is you guys are awesome, because the comments that we see, the genuine, authentic, like real, I'm going to call it, Erica's going to hate me on this one, I'm going to call it thought leadership, right? I know she really dislikes that term, but the thought leadership that you demonstrate in the way you comment sets you apart and makes it so easy. So even if I can't engage on the post, I can engage in the comments. I can reply to someone's comment because there's really smart stuff going on. How do you work around it, John? I'm curious to hear some of your strategies.
So for me, it still starts with the post, because if the post is, even if it's not something I'm familiar with, if it's engaging or provocative, I like to go into the comments and say, oh, wow, that's interesting. I'm learning more about it, because for me, it's about curiosity. But if it is something that's not very engaging, I don't bother looking at the comments, because you can pretty much bank. It's just an efficiency model. For instance, if it's self-promotional and I don't know anything about their product, service, or offering, there's not much for me to do in the comments, because all the comments are either, oh, I know somebody and I'll refer them to you, or good luck with your event, or some polite version of that. So I don't bother with those. So it's a start, but it's interesting that a good initial post seeds really juicy comments, and then the juicy comments beget additional juicy comments from other people, because it can kind of take its own little sub thread and go off in a tangent. That's fine. That's what you call engagement. That's exactly what you want. That's the game you're playing, and people forget that the game that they're winning is not the game they mean to be playing. They're trying to build their audience, their following, their reputation, and what they're playing is for instance, a really bad version of that is self-promotion. It's the worst form, because you don't build anything, because the only people that are listening to you are people already in your market. You're not going to do it that way. By preaching to people who say, yeah, I'm not in that market and I don't know anybody in that market, and you've got the link there, so there's nothing for me to do. If somebody that sees it from me sees it and clicks on it, okay, but I have no idea who I would send. You just make it, it's lack of generosity is what it is. You don't make it very generous or easy for the other people to post. Comments are the same way. So I like to always comment, always have a question, whatever it is, because that's an opening. In improv, that's an opening. And even if my question, and if I don't have a real question, that's when I bring in humor, because humor also is engaging. People say, oh, now he's joking around, and they'll poke fun at me, and we can go back, and now there's 3 or 4 more new comments, and then other people jump in and say, oh, me too, and good. It's engagement. That's the engagement game you're playing, and that's kind of fun too.
I'm putting a note in the chat about that, because I think that's a great suggestion, which is create a question when you're commenting to keep the dialogue going, or use humor. Sometimes self-effacing humor, be a little bit vulnerable with people. But that's what's actually going to create the more dialogue. So I really love that as a suggestion.
I usually use humor when I don't have anything to say, because if I want to support the person, they made an honest and appropriate thing, and I don't know much about it, I'll just say, for people like me who are who have a tendency not to be able to figure this, that, or that, or I'll say stuff like, I can't even spell IT, so you guys are talking about a high-tech webinar. You know what? I'm out probably. What about people who are really good? I can still end it with a question and turn a subject that I don't know much about into a volley back, which is supporting them to be able to say, oh, it's also for people that aren't very good with IT. I wouldn't know that because it's above my clearance just to understand what the post is about, because it has something to do with tech. Okay, I'm not terrible with tech. I'm just not that, I don't dig into it that much. I'm not so curious with tech. I hire that out to somebody on my team and say, this looks interesting. It might benefit us. Can you research it for me? Because I don't want to dig into that. And some people love digging into that stuff. But on a post, I can comment. And usually I'll just avoid it by poking fun, always at myself. I don't pick on people. I'll poke fun at myself, and then I'll ask the question back. I'll say, is this good for people that are good in tech and not good in tech? I've just opened it up. They can answer the question, and they're promoted. If it is even promotional, they can do that. So.
John, we've talked about, we started out our conversation around ugly baby posts, and
Yeah.
you've also used the phrasing, the non-generous posts, the posts
Yeah.
that they're not created to create that opportunity to have conversation around it. What patterns do you see, maybe in yourself or in others, that create those kind of posts? And let me give you an example. So I've noticed in
Non-generous
myself.
or generous?
Say again.
Non-generous or generous kinds of
Not non-generous. I'm
Yeah.
talking about the problematic, the posts that are not serving ourselves in
Yep.
the long run or serving the audience that we're trying to converse with.
Sure.
The pattern that I've noticed in myself is when I create those duds. I'm curious, have you guys had that problem out there? Like, you've created, like, I'd love to hear what you feel are the mistakes that you've made. I'll share mine. John, maybe you'll share a little bit about yours. If you've made any of these mistakes too, we'd love to hear them in the comments. But my mistake is rushing. When I find myself trying to do too many things at once and coming to social media and saying, I need to get a LinkedIn post out today.
I got 3 minutes to get a really cool, great one. Oh, here's something. Yeah.
9 times out of 10, not intentionally, but in hindsight, when I look back, those are the posts where I got caught up in my world, my perspective, and failed to create those openings and interfaces that allowed others to shine and look brilliant at what they do.
It's curious that you say that, because I finally just made it. It's always on my Monday to-do list, and it takes me 10 minutes because I'm not rushed. I just call it prep bat. I have to prep something for bat, which means I have to figure out what I'm going to post, if that's an article or a video, or what text I'm going to put in, what hashtags. Very rarely on a Tuesday or Thursday when I finally post it is it the same one. Now I've either edited it or I found a better video, because now my whole brain is in, once your eyes and ears open up to the fact that I'm going to post about paying off college student debt, everything I see for the next 3 days about that subject piques my interest. Say, oh, this is a better article. I'll post this study or this article or this whatever. So I have occasionally been jammed and done the same. And you're right. I haven't tracked it that way, but I bet those are my least performing ones, because I had to slap something together in order to get on the bat channel or the engagement at the right time. I would be willing to bet that those are my worst ones. The ones that I prep, they at least are what I want, and I can consider them and say, will this engage the audience? Is it provocative? Is it engaging? Is it the same thing everybody else is doing? Is there something opposite? All that stuff. And it's not hard to do that when you've got a little bit of time in advance. So it's very interesting you come up with that.
John, we're coming up on the end of our time here. And I think you and I could probably have done, on a different day, we could have done a 3-hour deep dive into this, because I feel like we're just scratching the surface. Yeah. We haven't talked about analytics and some of the apps out there. I think that's a topic. Would you guys like to hear more about that? Would you like to know more about what's happening in specifically the LinkedIn space around analytics, so you can see what's actually working for your posts and what's not, and pick up on some of these trends? There's a lot of things here. Creating content that is going to open the door to more of those enrollment conversations that you're ultimately looking for. Here's one of my challenging questions for you, and I think this would be a great one. I'd love to hear you guys talk about this when we do the Q&A tables in a moment. By the way, I put the link to AirMe in the comments. So if you want to join us for the Q&A tables, that is in the comments on social media. Our group is already getting there. As soon as we wrap up this live stream, they're going to be jumping on the tables. But here's my challenge to you guys. What would happen in your business if you, in the next 30 days, if you thought about taking half the time that you normally do in your content creation and you moved it over and just focused on what you could do with the comments? Maybe there's a day where you don't post at all, but as John said, he's doing himself. He's just going out and engaging with other people and expanding boosting that visibility into the news feeds of others, including folks who there's probably someone in your space or related space who has asked a question or created a conversation with hundreds of people. And that we see this with big influencers, hundreds of people who are your right prospects,
right,
one by one, that you could engage with if you could start a real conversation with them.
There's all kinds of strategies about that.
What are your last thoughts, John? What have we not if you were to wrap up in a minute or two, what are the thoughts here that we haven't covered that are most important? What should I have asked you?
Well, so here's the blind spot. And I'm a coach, so we go to blind spots all the time. The blind spots most people have in posting is that they think it's a good post and they haven't checked with anybody else. And so my own coach about a year ago said, how do you know? I said, it was frustrating to have posts that were duds. And he said, so why don't you, without telling them the stats, don't show them the views or all that other stuff, give people you trust your last 3 posts. 2 might have done, one did really well, one did okay, and one did terribly. Have them give you, quote, critical feedback. You're not asking them to say, isn't this a great post? You're saying, please give me critical feedback. You can seed it and say, does this engage you? Does it entertain you? Is it fun? Is it provocative? Is the video good? And that was gigantically helpful because people would say, that video looks like it's from 1942. You can't, and the sound on it is terrible. I turned it off after about 10 seconds and going, and I'm not thinking about that. I'm going, well, if you struggle through it, it's a great video. Who wants to struggle through a video? It's stupid. That's my fault. I should have found a better video. Well, those sort of things were super helpful because I got rid of my blind spots by people telling me, your baby is not only ugly, that's the ugliest baby I've ever seen. Super helpful to limit the number of duds I have. And people that and that care about you, you don't need 100 of them. You get 3. And you can do it for each other. And you're kind of brutally honest. Very helpful to up your game.
Yeah, I love that, getting that outside perspective on what you're creating. The last idea I want to share with you guys, just a big remember, we are playing somebody else's game. We're in their stadium. So whether you're posting on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever your preferred channels, you are in someone else's space. And there are rules that they've devised that are for their benefit and for growing their game and their business and their stadium. For example, how you engage. If you're trying to lead this is one of the big strategies I hear in the LinkedIn space is meet people on LinkedIn, get them off as soon as you can, get them somewhere else so you can converse with them. And there's reasons why that strategy is true from a certain perspective, but understand that LinkedIn is going to incentivize just the opposite.
Right.
If they see that pattern of behavior, and they're actually going to devise their algorithm. They're going to write their math formula that determines who gets seen in just the opposite way. So the more you can comment and drive engagement, the bigger impact you can make. You will be seen by more people. You have to play by their rules of the game because we're in their space.
Yeah. No, it's great.
John, I really appreciate on a busy day, you taking a little bit of time for us to go a little bit deeper on this conversation, this Masterclass Monday. We do have John for about 15 or 20 minutes. So
no, I can go till basically 28 after. I just got to flip to another call.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you're being generous with the extra time. I know we've got folks that are eager to connect with you, but not only John, but other experts who are in the audience. Again, some of the best experts that you've maybe never heard of, but are absolute geniuses in what they do. We haven't even really talked tonight about what John does with Evoking Genius. That's worthy of a conversation. You definitely want, if nothing else, please make sure you check out his TED Talk, his TEDx Talk, where he talks about the 1 in a billion genius, that thing that's baked into your DNA that nobody else in the world has. Maybe even ask John about impossible challenges, impossible missions, because I think there's a fun story around that as well. Folks, we're going to wrap up the live stream now. We're going to jump into the Q&A tables, and then we'll be doing that speed networking right after. If you're not sure where, I put the link to AirMeet in the comments. So wherever you're watching us now, you can jump into AirMeet. You'll see the tables, pick a seat, and connect with the experts or John there for further conversation. John, thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you coming back. Multi-time guest. We've had him on expert panels before. This is the first chance we've had to have a one-on-one.
My parole officer calls it a repeat offender, but it's the same thing. Yeah.
We're happy to have you. Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
All right.
Time for Book of Experts TV.
Topics you love.
Experts you trust.
friction-free referrals.
Tried,
Tested.
Trusted.